Hi, Pastor Baldwin.
Yes.
Hey, sir, this is Logan Prolos here on with Framing the World. How you doing today, sir?
Yeah, doing fine. Logan, how are you?
I'm doing good. So we talked about a month ago, and it was a great conversation we had. I appreciate you giving us the time to come back on with us today. We're looking forward to chatting with you about, the current events. It seems like it's gotten even crazier here. Just to remind people and let them know, Pastor Chuck Baldwin is the pastor at Liberty Fellowship up in Montana. He has a newsletter that goes out every Thursday. If you guys want to go to libertyfellowshipmt.com and sign up, or you can go to Chuck Baldwin Live and sign up for his newsletter that comes out every Thursday. It looks like you also have a new book I see on Chuck Baldwin Live, The Freedom Documents, America's Most Important Founding Documents in One Book, coming out June 11th. So make sure to go on his website and check that out and support him. And we appreciate you having you on the show today, sir. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Logan. Good to be with you.
Great. So we'll just kind of get right into it. What are your thoughts on the coronavirus? Just kind of like how this has gone. It seems like we had the coronavirus shutdown, and then they were talking about murder hornets, and now they have these riots going all around. What are your thoughts on kind of what's happening today?
Well, I think the power elite that are the shadow government in Washington are making a full court press to take America into a state of martial law. I believe that's the end game. And I believe that now that the coronavirus is, well, not only past its peak, but more and more people are recognizing that it was a fraud to begin with. The alarm factor regarding corona is long gone. They cannot, for the most part, scare people into submission with the virus anymore. So that means they have to come up with another emergency. And the emergency is the riots. And it's interesting that you're starting the show with that, because the column that I wrote this week that's coming out tomorrow that you talked about, my syndicated column that goes out every Thursday, I talk much about the riots and what's going on with it. And there's no doubt in my mind, I mean, no doubt whatsoever, that there are within the movement that has caused the riots, starting in Minnesota and then spreading around the country, consists of government agent provocateurs that are flaming the fires of hatred and discontent so as to purposely create unrest in the country and justify the use of federal force, even military force, which is for the most part unconstitutional, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
and martial law. So that's what I believe is happening at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting that, you're talking about agent provocateurs. They have the video of the gentleman that was, breaking up the windows of the AutoZone, that people are tying him to the local police force. And then you have these pallets of bricks that are just kind of in all these major cities where there's no construction going on. What are your thoughts? Have you seen those pictures of random pallets of bricks just being set up where these riots are happening?
Yeah, I've seen a few of those. And again, anytime this thing happens, or something like this nature, we have the same kind of questions that arise. There's always unexplained phenomena that is associated with these kind of activities, and things that just don't make sense, things that could not have happened spontaneously. Too many things that come together so quickly and so thoroughly that tells anybody with a discerning spirit that you're not looking at a spontaneous riot. You're looking at a planned government operation. You're looking at something that was in the works for many months, if not longer, and was put into play at the moment that was called for, and they had everything set up and ready to go so that it could be spread across the country for maximum effect. So these kind of things are always what we see, and so many of the American people just accept what they hear on and watch on television, and they don't think for themselves, and the powers that be are relying on that.
Right. It's interesting, how the media distorts things. Just a few weeks ago, you started to have people protesting, the shutdowns, right? Protesting the closure of churches and things like that. And they were going to their state assemblies, and it was during the day, and there was no violence, nothing like that. It was super peaceful, but it was during the day. You notice a difference between there's day protests during the day and protests during the night. And so you had these people that are protesting at the local assemblies. And the media was just like, how could they? There's coronavirus. They were still accusing these people of they're going to spread coronavirus, and they're not wearing their masks, they're not social distancing. The media was real down on them. And then literally a week or two later, you have these massive riots, and it's like they don't even say a word about coronavirus anymore.
Right. Like I said, the coronavirus has passed its peak of effectiveness. They got all the mileage that they could out of it, and let's give them credit. They accomplished a lot. They were able to lock down the vast majority of this country. They took 40 million jobs away from the American people. They added tens of millions of people to food stamps and welfare. They put in the minds and the hearts of people the legitimacy of staying under house arrest, which for all intents and purposes is what it was. The lockdown orders were nothing more than house arrest. The idea that people that are not sick, people that are well, are going to be forced to stay in their homes. That's not quarantine. That's not isolation. That's house arrest. And they sold the vast majority of the American people on that concept, thinking that it was the right thing to do, the good thing to do, and protecting and all that kind of stuff. Beyond that, I went over this Sunday in my message at Liberty Fellowship when I was tracing some history of our country and even back into Old Testament history. And I was showing the price that our forebears have paid in this country and in freedom-loving people's lives even before America came into existence. The love of liberty has burned bright in the hearts and souls of men and women for millennia. And I've traced some of the history of the sacrifices that freedom-loving men and women have paid in order to bring to future generations the freedoms that they enjoy. Certainly that's the case here in the United States. And in rehearsing all of the thousands of years of sacrifice, the thousands of years of blood and labor that these great men and women gave in order to bequeath to their posterity a free nation, a free existence. And in the United States, the first liberty in our country was religious liberty. That was the very first concept of liberty of which the nation rallied around. And of course, that's enshrined in our First Amendment to our Bill of Rights. That is sacrosanct and has been ever since our country came into existence. And all of these hundreds of years in American history and thousands, tens of thousands of years in secular history, and in 3 months, in 90 days, Logan, think about it. In 3 months, the pastors and Christians of America gave up what all of these men and women had fought for and bled for thousands of years. That is religious liberty. The state told them, you can't have your church services, you can't meet at Easter, you can't have communion, you no longer have religious liberty, you cannot obey the scriptures to assemble together. We are telling you that when you can meet and when you can't meet, we will dictate your worship. And churches of all denominations and pastors of all denominations rolled over and gave up the most sacred liberty that we have in America, religious liberty, without a whimper, in 90 days. So when you talk about what they were able to accomplish during that corona scare, they accomplished a lot. However, at this point, the fraud is being brought to light, and more people are reading the statistics that are coming out, even from the medical community, that are showing us that the coronavirus was never what it was purported to be, and that it was a ruse. In fact, I would even say it was a con job. And the fear factor is missing. The Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity came out just recently, and I've got this in my column that I'm putting out tomorrow. That I give these statistics, and he put out a great summary of the exaggerated, inflated, and manipulated statistics from the CDC and Fauci and Birx and all these phonies who were scaring the American people into slavery when all the while they knew it was fraudulent information. And I quote all that in my column. But now, with that being, that factor not being as influential, as effective as it was, they have to come up with something else. They have to come up with another emergency. And the fact that this is going on back to back, we're not even completely out of the corona scare. We're not completely out of it. People are still wearing masks and, still taking your temperatures every time you go see a doctor or every time you go to an airport or whatever. So we're not even completely out of that. And now then we go into this next emergency that's going to require, and of course there's Donald Trump again, the ignoramus when it comes to the Constitution, threatening to use military force against the American people, which of course the Posse Comitatus Act completely rules unlawful. The Insurrection Act that Trump is using, saying that he might use, of course, strict restrictions on what the U.S. military can and cannot do in relative to domestic law enforcement. The idea that the U.S. armed forces would be aiming their weapons at U.S. citizens on U.S. soil should send chills down the spine of every real American, and nobody should put up with that. No real American military officer should order that, and no real American soldier should follow such an order if given. This is shades of every tyrannical regime in human history. The government using its military against its own people. And of course, Trump has he has no reservation whatsoever because he's a tyrant at heart. But the bottom line is that 54% of the American people, most of whom are the Christians and the conservatives and Republicans and people that support Trump, these are the people that are saying yes, bring in the military, bring in the military, bring in the military. I mean, they're crazy. They have no concept what they are doing. And I also go into some details relative, in my column, relative to what this riot situation is really all about. And I think that John Whitehead, who is the president of the Rutherford Institute, has put together the best summary of what's going on right now with these riots that I've read to date. And I quote much of his analysis in my column as well. But anyway, that's an overview of what I think is happening.
Okay. I wanted to get you, kind of following up on the, the military. I kind of feel, this is just my opinion, I'd like to get yours, that there's already a standing army, and that's the militarization of the police force. I want to get your thoughts on that, and the government programs where they are, for years they've been, recommissioning military vehicles that were used in Iraq and Afghanistan to civilian use and repainting and repurposing them, but that you have these large military vehicles and armament and tactics that are being used, and they're actively pulling their recruitment from retired military. And so as you see these vehicles we've been seeing them the last few years when you have these different, these riots pop up, whether they're in Ferguson or whatever. But they use them. They use them every day, and they're no-knock warrants. They're regular use. It's not like they're only holding them just for these crazy times. They're using them regularly. What's your opinion on the militarization of the police today?
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. And people that read my columns on a regular basis know that I have documented this activity for years. That this is something that should concern every freedom-loving American. Unfortunately, on the conservative or Christian side of the aisle, they seem to be very supportive of the militarization of our police. It's a strange phenomenon that the conservative right and the Christian right have morphed into. They have become more militaristic. They have become more police state in their orientation over the decades. I think it started with Bush,
right,
and it's just escalated through the 21st century. And now Trump comes along, who is a rabid militarist, and he has brought out the military aggression, the militarism from the hearts and the souls of the Christian community like nobody I've ever seen. And I don't think that he hasn't put it in them. He's just brought it out of them. It was already in them, and he comes along sharing that same ideology, that militaristic ideology, and he's brought that out of these evangelicals. So I don't fault Trump for putting it in them, but he's just the vehicle that brings it out of them. But the bottom line is they seem to support all of this activity. And you're absolutely right about the military hardware and the military personnel and the training, et cetera. And I go into that quite a bit in the column, quoting John Whitehead. He's on the forefront of this particular subject. If people are not familiar with John Whitehead over at the Rutherford Institute, they need to look him up, and they need to start following his material, because he documents in great detail the things that we're talking about right now, and of which I quote some of in the column. So that is I think is what is really the underlying element that we must be most concerned about, and it's the element that nobody on the right seems to want to talk about. They just ignore it. I really believe that Christians and evangelicals and conservatives, they need to get over their love affair with all things police and all things military, and they need to fall in love with liberty and constitutional government again. Our love and our affection should rest with freedom, constitutional government, the Bill of Rights, our Declaration of Independence, the founding principles that gave us the greatest free nation in the history of the world. That should be where our affections lie, not with somebody who wears a uniform and carries a gun. And the idea that we've transferred our allegiance from the great doctrines of liberty to these individuals who wear a badge and who carry a gun or put on a uniform and equate the one as the same as the other is absolute foolishness. The principles of liberty are what are sacrosanct in this country. And anyone in uniform, with a badge, without a badge, out of uniform, left, right, black, white, man, woman, it doesn't matter. Anyone who supports the principles of liberty, we should support. Anyone who doesn't support the principles of liberty, we shouldn't support. It's as simple as that. There's another element that nobody will talk about, and that is that increasingly our U.S. law enforcement personnel are being trained by Israelis in Israel. And in my column that comes out tomorrow, I document that the police officers in Minnesota were trained in Israel. And that should concern everybody, because Israelis, they have no Bill of Rights. They have no constitution. They treat the Palestinian people as enemy combatants. And their law enforcement tactics, which are militaristic from top to bottom, are designed with that philosophy in mind. They're not about policing. They're about war. They train their patrolmen and the various entities within the law enforcement establishment, which are all military in nature. They train them as soldiers, as warriors, and the unarmed civilian population of Palestine are treated as enemy combatants. And that is how they conduct their training procedures for the law enforcement personnel in Israel. Well, those same men are instructing many of our U.S. law enforcement personnel. They're being trained to treat the people as enemy combatants. So the American people are increasingly viewed by police officers, especially in big cities, as enemy combatants. And the training tactics that they're being taught reflect that philosophy. For example, the knee on the neck that now is so famous in Minnesota, which produced the death of this individual. That is the knee on the neck technique is straight out of the Israeli handbook. That is the way they are taught, and oftentimes the goal is to very slowly and tortuously break the neck of the subject, and that's what often happens over in Israel. When they put the knee on the neck, they put all their weight on it, they leave it there, and very slowly and very painfully break the neck of the people that are on the ground. So this knee on the neck, that's an Israeli strategy. That's a Israeli technique. They learned that in Israel. That was not an American-taught technique. That was an Israeli-taught technique. And so we're seeing the results. When you talk about the militarization of police, much of that comes from Israel. That's all they have in Israel is military police. They don't know anything else. And for our policemen to be trained as military troops by military troops in Israel is going to bring back to the streets of America exactly what happened in Minneapolis.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you're 100% correct on that. And it's when you say something like that, I've seen that, like a couple people posting about that, like posting pictures of showing, Israeli military force using that on Palestinians, and they're tying that together. But it's almost like if you were to dare say anything like that, you'd immediately be called out as, anti-Semitic. And it's, you're hitting at the base of the right, because the Zionist Christians love Israel and love Jerusalem, so much, and the Jews, and so they're like, you can never say anything derogatory about that. What I want to talk about, or kind of hit on what you were talking about before. The glorification of war. It seems like ever since World War II, Hollywood has just pumped movie after movie glorifying war and patriotism in America, and us conquering the bad guy, and this glorification of the military, and how there's never any dissent from the right about military tactics, or what happens, they're always pro-war. In these, Iraq and Afghanistan, you never heard anything from your typical, right-wing evangelical that we shouldn't be over there. They're always super pro-war. And so you have this glorification of it. And I kind of wanted to get your opinion on, and this has a little more to touch on, is more end times. The left always comes, they're always the ones that are pushing the the law, that's where the socialism and things like that. And so that's where the right is always claiming, that they think the Antichrist is going to come. They say Barack Obama was the Antichrist. They think that's where that spirit of Antichrist is going to come from. But I've kind of felt these last few years, as you kind of see the glorification of it, and how the anytime it's a right-wing president pushing these laws, about the Patriot Act and everything, they never say anything. They just eat it up and love it. And I just have a feeling that that's how the devil works, is he kind of does a bait and switch. And I feel like the Antichrist, the spirit of it, is going to come through the right, through evangelical, the typical, the so-called Christians, and the people that are pro-war and love all this stuff, that never say anything bad about the military. And they don't understand is you can say something, that just saying that you don't agree with military tactics or the war, they immediately say, well, oh, you must hate the troops. It's like, well, no, I don't hate the troops. Those are just regular guys doing their job, they're just a regular Joe. I'm talking about the things that they're required to do and they're told to do. That's what I don't like. Do you have an opinion on, or a thought about where you think the spirit of Antichrist is going to come, versus left versus right?
Well, you've covered a lot of ground there. Let me just say that there's no question that the Christian right is absolutely enamored with, and maybe even intoxicated with, war and all things military. And you're right that their love affair with faux Israel is at the root of much of all the stuff that you just talked about. Most of the wars that we fought since World War II have been at the behest of the faux state of Israel in the capital there in Tel Aviv. We have sacrificed thousands of American lives on behalf of Israel. We have taken the lives of, probably in the neighborhood of 2 million, that's a conservative figure, 2 million people around the world fighting wars for Israel. This is since World War II. We have bases all over the world. We have military personnel all over the Middle East. Most of the militarization of America has come after World War II and on behalf of the state of Israel. And of course, they're basing that support on prophecy scriptures, which have been egregiously misinterpreted. Mm-hmm. And so they're believing a lie. And I believe that when you talk about Antichrist, the spirit of Antichrist, which is already in the world, as John told us in his epistles, that the spirit of Antichrist is headquartered in Tel Aviv, Israel. And it is the place where most of the deception of the Christian world is coming from. And these false preachers like John Hagee and Paula White and all these phony preachers that are out there taking the scriptures out of context and telling the American people that the rebirth of Israel in 1948 is the fulfillment of prophecy and the coming of Christ and all that, which is absolutely nonsense. It's not biblical. It's not prophetic. It's not scriptural. They've been reading the notes of C.I. Schofield too long, and they take it as gospel, and this is what has prompted this love of the military. If you would take away the infatuation with Israel, you would immediately lose much of this militaristic ideology and maybe even idolatry that is going on for all things military. I think that the correlation is absolutely there. So, you've got a situation here that is the perfect storm as far as against truth and against the Bible and against real prophecy and against real scripture going on, and it's the Christians, and if I'm reading what you're saying correctly, it's the Christians, so-called Christians, that are the motivators and the movers and shakers and the ones that are that are behind it. So I think your point is well taken. Is that the evil one has, I believe, totally blinded the minds and the hearts of the vast majority of professing Christians, and that includes the pulpits. And as a result, instead of truth being disseminated, truth sets people free. Truth is the light that removes the darkness. But whenever the people that are supposed to be preaching the truth are preaching lies, then you have no light, and the light is not piercing the darkness, and the darkness is enveloping the world. And you're not going to get any light from the people that don't believe Christ and His Word and the truth of His Word and the things of the Spirit of God. So you're not going to get light from them. The light has to come from those who know the Lord, those who know the Bible, those who have the Holy Spirit, those who are illuminated with the Scripture. But whenever they are not illuminated, whenever they are blinded, whenever they are darkened, their hearts and eyes are darkened to the truth, then there is no light permeating the darkness, and darkness is falling over the country. And I think that's exactly what we see going on right now.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I want to talk to you about racism in America. Everybody says that racism is systemic throughout American culture, and it pervades everything. And I thought, I had a feeling, when I was kind of getting into the liberty movement and researching, the militarization of police and police brutality, and seeing all these videos, it was around the time of Eric Gardner when he got choked out in New York. And it seemed like America was kind of waking up to this, because that's when they were kind of instituting they were starting all these government programs where they were really militarizing the police and bringing all this equipment over. And it seemed like America was starting to wake up of like, okay, there's something going on here, like the TSA and the Border Patrol, like they were starting to get upset with it. You can kind of feel it, when you talk to people that might not even believe on your political spectrum, but they were kind of seeing that like there's a militarization going on here, and that's what the problem is. And then and then Ferguson had happened, and then you had the whole hands up, don't shoot, and the Black Lives Matter movement, and it seemed like it just got completely co-opted. And it became a race issue. It became this is a white cop versus a black man. And it became a race thing. It was no longer the police brutality of it. It was, this is happening because these cops are racist, not because of their training or the institution that's, of militarization that's happening, but just because they're just racist jerks. What's your opinion on that of racism in America versus, is it racism or is it the militarization? What do you think about when they say, this is just racism, nothing else?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, no, absolutely, I do not believe it's racism and nothing else. Are there racist cops? Sure. There's racist, electricians, and there's racist doctors, and there's racist construction workers, and you'll find racism anywhere. Is racism does it still exist in our country? Absolutely. Is it what is driving these riots and these types of activities, and is it driving this police abuse that you're speaking of? No. For the most part, absolutely not. This is not about racism. This is about a systemic training operation within law enforcement. This is systemic. Again, it's organizational. It is not racial in nature. You'll find these brutal tactics being used as much against whites and other races as you do blacks.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not a racial thing. I'll tell you what this is, though. Like I said earlier in this broadcast, I do believe with all of my heart that we have agent provocateurs within these movements that are fanning the flames of racism, fanning the flames of hatred, bigotry, prejudice. They are deliberately stirring up the emotions of people in order to generate the kind of mayhem that we see in the streets of many of these larger cities today. So, this is, I believe, is a planned government operation, just as much as the coronavirus was a planned government operation. I believe these riots are a planned government operation. And I do not believe that the vast majority of the people of America are racist. I really don't.
Right.
I've experienced it once in a while. You run across somebody who's an obvious racist, and you note that person, you hear them, you see them, yep, that's a racist. But I got to tell you, I'm in my 60s. I've lived 2/3 of my life, and in all of my life, I only have personally known a very small number of people that would be racist, and that would include all races. There's blacks that are as racist as there are whites. There's Asians that are racist. There's all kinds of racism from various people, but it's such a small percentage of the whole that it really cannot be factored into anything of this magnitude that we're looking at. So I don't believe it. I do not believe that on the whole the American people are racist people. I don't believe it.
Yeah, I agree with
you.
But
I believe that we have a government operation with agent provocateurs. Israel does this all the time over in the Middle East with the Palestinian people and the Mossad operations. And our CIA does this kind of stuff all over the world when we want to destabilize a government or a country. We have CIA infiltrators that will serve as agent provocateurs, and they'll create riots and mayhem and disturbances within capitals and within governments and major cities and so forth, trying to destabilize a regime, for example, that we don't like. And we do this all the time. So this, to me, is nothing to do with racism, and it has everything to do with a planned government operation to destabilize the United States of America in order to bring in a government solution, which in this case involves military action.
Mm-hmm. I just have a quick question. I'm trying to make a quick question before we let you go. We appreciate the time you've given us. It's been an awesome talk. What do you think the appropriate level of response should be from the police? Because obviously there's, we don't live in a society of judges anymore where, the citizenry is supposed to protect. It's interesting. You see, like the smaller towns and more rural America, they're locked and loaded. You see them all strapped up. Like no one's going out to the suburbs to wreak havoc. It's only in these major city centers, where there's very little gun, they're not pro-gun advocates, right? And so there's no community that's going to police itself, right? And so you have this standing police force that is supposed to be the ones protecting us and protecting our property. And Paul, and Dustin went down on Saturday and saw the downtown Phoenix and saw the riot as that was going on, the protest, quote unquote, that turned into a full-on riot. There was a riot in Scottsdale, which is where the shopping center, no protest, just immediately to a riot, right? Where there's just roving bands, looting and breaking, right? And so what should the appropriate level of response be by a police force? What should we expect from our police force to stop these riots and this looting? Well,
obviously the police are trained on these things, and the National Guard units are are trained on these things. So they, for the most part, they know how to deal with these situations. But I'm going to go back to your supposition, and I think it's maybe a faulty supposition, because I do believe that it is the responsibility of the individuals. I don't care where they live,
right?
Whether it's a big city or a small town, or whether it's a big state or a small state. It's our responsibility to defend and protect ourselves. The courts of our country have ruled consistently that it's not the job of the police to protect your life. I mean, that's not only a moral fact and a biblical fact and a natural law fact. It is a court fact. It's a legal fact that is the responsibility of citizens to defend themselves. It is not the responsibility of police to defend yourself.
Right.
So, this idea, if we accept the concept that it's the job of the police to protect us, well, then, I don't know what to tell you.
Right.
You're a sheep, for the slaughter. You have no protection, because the police are not required to protect you, and that's court rulings that have said that repeatedly. This is not just one or two, but the court rulings have said that the police are not obligated to protect the citizenry. So you are obligated to protect yourself. So if you take the position that I'm not going to protect myself, I'm not going to buy a gun, I'm not going to have an AR-15 with a large capacity magazine, I'm not going to have a Glock pistol with a large capacity magazine, I'm not going to carry these weapons, I'm not going to be prepared to defend myself, my wife, my family, my neighborhood, my kids, my property, well then you're just okay. Good luck.
Right.
I don't know what to
Best
tell
of luck to you. Yeah.
Because it's not the cop's job to protect you.
Right.
That is a fact of natural law, and it's a fact of court law in this country. And so I think it's time for the American people to realize, no matter where they live, they have the obligation to defend themselves. And if they live in a city, a state, a locale that denies them the right to keep and bear arms, move.
Right.
Why do you stay in a tyrannical state? Why do you volunteer to live in a land of tyranny and subject your family and your friends and your neighbors to what is happening right now? Can happen anytime, any place, especially in the bigger cities.
Mm-hmm.
And these things are constantly a possibility. And you're going to tell, oh, I'm not going to have a gun, and oh, I can't have a gun. The state says I can't hold a gun.
Right.
Oh, I can't have. Well, who says you have to stay there? I mean, at this point in time, you still have the freedom to find a freedom-loving state that will allow you to protect yourself. Here in Montana, I guarantee you're not going to come into a community and try to do what they're doing in Minneapolis and get by with it. I promise you it's not going to happen. And that's because of the mentality of the people and the leaders of this state who understand the importance and the necessity of gun possession. So all I'm saying is this is a faulty position if we accept the concept that we don't have a right to keep and bear arms, and that it's only the police that are going to protect us. Then we have already lost. We've lost everything at that point.
I agree. I think that's a great point. Pastor Baldwin, we really appreciate you hanging out with us today and chatting to our audience. We appreciate the extra couple of minutes you gave us. Please go and support Pastor Baldwin. Go to chuckbaldwinlive.com and sign up for his newsletter. Support them at libertyfellowship.com, libertyfellowshipmt.com. Do you want to, is there any, I see this, you have a book coming up June 11th. Is that correct? Can you promote that for us?
Yeah, the Freedom Documents that we produce twice a year, and it's the greatest historical documents in one volume, and it sells out very quickly. We produce it in June and then in November. And so next Thursday, a week from tomorrow, we'll be publishing it again. And again, it's a very popular book, and it sells out within about 3 weeks. And so we encourage people to get it. Yeah, the main website to get this information is chuckbaldwinlive.com. chuckbaldwinlive.com. And the books and the DVDs that we have are all there, as well as you can sign up for the newsletter. The column goes out free of charge to email. We have tens of thousands of people that already subscribe. And every Thursday in your inbox, you'll get it absolutely free. Share it with everybody that you can. And we talked a lot today about the subject matter of the column that goes out tomorrow, so very appropriate. Thank you very much, Logan, for letting me be with you again.
Thank you, sir. We look forward to chatting with you again. God bless you, sir.
All right. God bless you.
All right.